Stupidly said, "You can't do that, Bill's not here." And then later, it was like, "Oh yeah, that was the point." So, and then there were other things. We got to talk.
Yeah.
There were other things.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about this.
All right.
Yeah,
How did things go?
well, I'm having my practice talk today, so. Did you get my email, Ken?
I did. All right, I'm going to unmute everybody.
Yes.
I'm unmuting all to let all the chaos ensue of where everybody is connected. Actually, let me just introduce folks.
Where's Jim?
I will go back to everybody there. Not everybody can see everybody, but just a moment, and I will.
UMass is here.
Great.
Great. Oh my gosh.
There is a whole lot of folks. Let me put this up here, and we can see. There are. Well, you can't quite see everybody there. We have the right way. Looks like we already have about, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm gonna turn this way.
Sherry is right here. TOC, who's doing TOC?
All right, I'm gonna move this back down here so we don't have to be distracted by all of that. Mute everybody.
Patrick Yellow's probably who's doing TOC?
So my name's Chad Seidel. I think everybody can see me. I've muted everybody, all the participants on that end, just so we can get this started. But we have, again, it looks like we're approaching about 20 connections. We are really pleased to have everybody joining in here for this first instance of connecting the DeRISK Center, the Wind Center in Roseau in Canada, focusing on small drinking water systems issues. Just excited to get collaborations growing amongst the researchers, amongst the faculty, but most importantly, amongst students. While we're doing lots of great research, investigating really great things of new treatment technologies and overcoming barriers for small systems, my personal opinion is that one of the biggest outcomes of this overall effort of the 2 centers in the US, and certainly what's already going on in Canada, is that we're equipping the next generation of people to solve these problems for small systems, where we frankly have not been doing that much in the last decade or two, from my perspective, and others that might have a perspective beyond that, I think would say we hadn't been doing it much beyond that as well. And so I want to just really encourage everybody to use this seminar as a means to reach out and connect with folks. For those that are in other locations, you can kind of run through the attendee list on the participants list there. What I want to do is introduce the speakers, and we've got this 1 hour to talk. We are recording this, so we will be able to edit and or post this to our center's website in a little bit. And then we just want to be able to facilitate the connections amongst folks. So before we go too far, I don't want to do introductions for everybody, but I want everybody to appreciate how many different groups of people we have on here. So I'm Chad Seidel sitting here at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm going to turn our little R2D2 thing around. You can see Joy Barrett, Bill Hogrewe, and then we have a number of graduate students that are all waving hi and saying hello here in Boulder. And there are others that are joining in from other locations. I'm going to bring it back around and we'll take it from there. But we have, I can see the good group in UMass there. I see Pablo is online here at the University of Colorado. We've got students at other university locations. I see the Walkerton Clean Water Center, other researchers in other locations that I'm aware of their locations. I see Trevor Boyer's group is logged on from UF in Florida. Gosh, we just have more and more great folks participating. So this is terrific to see, first and foremost, that this is working, that we have all these people collaborating, and that we have an opportunity to share things and get through this presentation. So let me get back to the primary purpose here of introducing our speakers. And maybe, Dave Reckow, you and your group there at UMass, can you give me a big thumbs up if you see on screen the title slide, what is a small system? Yay, it works. That's terrific. All right, so then let me introduce Bill and Joy. They're gonna take the stage here. They're gonna present, and actually I'll hand you the slide clicker.
Okay, great.
So Bill Hogrewe and Joy Barrett are key collaborators of the DeRISK Center. They are researchers that come from the University of Colorado system, have been engaged in addressing small water systems for quite some time. And we're glad to have them as a part of this team because the Rural Community Assistance Partnership is really a great nonprofit organization that addresses issues of small systems. Get a lot of their funding from grant sources, but they have a key perspective and a keen perspective, I would also add, of small systems issues in the U.S. They know who they are, they know what the problems are, they know what academic research can help solve, and equally as important, they know what academic research can't solve. And so they're a key part of our group to help keep us on track. And so I'm glad to have Joy start up with this, and we will pass it on to Bill shortly thereafter. And if you have questions or things that come up, please just send a chat message via the Zoom platform and I'll watch it from there. Otherwise, we'll just move on through the presentation and get to about 45 minutes from now and open it up for some dialogue and some questions. And not to let people know about his punctuality, but Scott Summers has also joined the room. And there he goes. All right. Back to Joy.
Okay, great. And Chad, before we get going, there was just a little warning sign here that the
Yes.
projector's overheating. Okay,
It
I just
is.
want to make sure you
If
saw
if
that.
it does have a problem, if our projector has a problem, everybody else will still see what's on screen, but we'll just have to switch to looking on the little
Okay.
screen mode. In the meantime, I'll try to find
I'll
something
look at
else.
the notes. Okay, great.
So, all right.
Thanks a lot, Chad, and thanks for the invitation to come and talk. The Rural Community Assistance Partnership is really happy to be part of this team. We're very excited at the insights to bring together a team of this nature. And it's appropriate that we would start the seminar series by setting the context for what small systems are, since these grants, these centers, and all of us are working on solving small systems drinking water issues.
See if that works for you.
Great. So I want to tell you a little bit about our organization. RCAP, Rural Community Assistance Partnership, is a national organization, and we consist of 6 regional organizations and a national office in DC. Bill and I are with the national office, but we have the good fortune of doing our work from Boulder, Colorado, our home. And we cover all 50 states and territories, US territories as well. We do our work with 160 field staff who are certified drinking water operators, water and wastewater engineers, and administrative and financial specialists as well. Our funding comes mostly from the federal government, and we also have state contracts in certain states. So with that, we can go on. Okay, so what we're going to cover in today's presentation is 3 topics: facts about small systems, compliance challenges that small systems face, and also capacity issues. These 3 areas are what have to be taken into consideration in order to be effectively implementing innovative technologies in small systems. All of these areas have to be taken into consideration. So first, some EPA definitions. I know this is going to be a review to most of you, but I just want to make sure we all start with a reminder of several different ways of classifying systems, drinking water systems. One is size, and that's simply the population served. The other is what's the source of that population's water. And third, what are the characteristics? And you might say, well, what does that mean? We'll talk more about that in a second. So first, a look at size. So from EPA's website, there are these divisions in system size, okay? Based on the number of people served. And for a long time, we talked about small water systems as 3,300 and under. But in fact, the reality is that the centers and many EPA-funded projects deal with systems going up to 10,000 in population. We'll talk a lot more about the breakdown of this category, these categories right here in just a few minutes. Okay, so that was size. In terms of source water, we have 3 categories of source water as well. Groundwater, surface water, and then groundwater under the direct influence of surface water, often called groundwater under direct influence or GWUDI. You'll hear Bill and me say GWUDI probably because we use that term a lot. In terms of public water systems, here are the definitions of public water systems, okay? So it's going to be consumed by humans through some means of transporting that water. At least 15 service connections or 25 people, at least 60 days a year. And a pretty big deal here is the fact that there are over 150,000 public water systems in the United States. We'll also talk more about how that breaks down in a minute. EPA has defined 3 types of public water systems, 3 categories, and it's based on who they serve. And those categories are, first of all, a community water system. So that's a public water system that supplies water to the same population year-round. The next category is a non-transient, non-community water system. And that's a system that supplies water to at least 25 of the same people 6 months a year, but not year-round. And some examples include workplaces, schools, and also hospitals, and many hospitals have their own water systems. Finally, here is transient non-community water systems. Here's an example of a camping rig, and campgrounds fall into that because these are water systems that provide water in a gas station, a campground, a rest stop, someplace where people pass through. The whole point of these categories in terms of deciding how to regulate drinking water quality is how much exposure are people going to have, okay? So if people are passing through, then they're not going to have as much exposure as people who work there every day, or certainly not as much as people for whom that's their water supply year-round. Okay, so one of the projects that RCAP has done is to look at SIDWIS data, Safe Drinking Water Information System, really a terrific source of information about what's going on in the whole country in terms of drinking water. Don't worry, don't try and pay too much attention or memorize what's going on in each of these categories, but this is just a summary of the report we did. We have that report. If anybody wants to get it, we'll be happy to send it to you. Please talk to us afterwards, grab a card. And most of you actually have our email addresses, and that goes for people who are joining us remotely as well as people in the room. So we broke down systems in terms of size, in terms of source, and in terms of whether which type of system they are, and also who owns and runs that water system. And we'll talk a bit more about that. So here are some fascinating figures. 97% of that greater than 150,000 public water systems serve fewer than 10,000 people. So Our definition, our functional definition that we're using for small water systems being under 10,000 served, this shows that 97% are small water systems. 94%, still a huge number, serve fewer than 3,300, and 81% serve fewer than 500. Still, the majority serve fewer than 100 people. So that's a huge number of small systems out there needing attention. More characteristics. These are kind of breakdowns of that massive table that we had up just a minute ago from our research. 92% of those systems that serve 10,000 and under. So now we're talking about the small systems. 92% of those use groundwater as their source water. 8% use woody or surface water, okay? So, and of those, 34% are community water systems, 12% non-transient, non-community, and then 54%, so still the bulk of those systems are transient non-community systems. And of all of these, 70% are privately owned systems. So I want to stress that this slide right here tells us what we're dealing with out there, okay? So if we're going to look at approaches for effectively transferring technologies, we have to consider first and foremost, the bulk of the small systems in the country use groundwater, okay? And also the bulk are transient non-community, and the overwhelming majority are privately owned. So that says something about the technical aspects, but also very much about the structural aspects of how we make change, effective change, how we effectively transfer innovative technologies when we're dealing with all kinds of private ownership entities. So that's a big challenge in terms of the varied nature of our stakeholders there. Let's take a minute to step back and see who is covered by water systems in the US. RCAP did a report in 2004 called Still Living Without the Basics. I'll show you that on a slide in a minute, and I have a copy of our report here if you want to thumb through it afterwards. In the slide presentation, there's a link to that report. We used the US 2000 census data to come up with people in the United States. How many people and who are they? Don't even have indoor plumbing. And our report showed that 1.7 million people in the United States do not have indoor plumbing. And you could say, well, those are probably this category of people located in this area. But in fact, one day I left our office in Washington, DC, and traveled 100 miles to Maryland and was in the home of some people who did not have indoor plumbing. And so they're not necessarily people in the most remote areas, but what this document does is characterize, okay, who are those households without indoor plumbing? And here's a picture of the book I just showed you, the report. And here is some information about who those people are who don't have indoor plumbing. This is a slide that breaks down the 1.7 million people by numbers of systems in each state. But it's probably more helpful to look at this in terms of the percentage of systems in each state. And so you'll see that leading is Alaska. And Alaska has 6.32% of its households, based on the 2000 census data, without indoor plumbing. Okay, maybe not too surprising. Puerto Rico is a close second over here. And Puerto Rico is sitting at 5.2% without indoor plumbing. After that, we have Arizona and New Mexico at coming in between 1 and 2% of households without indoor plumbing. And then a whole array of systems here that are running at about 1% of households without any indoor plumbing. Now, I wanted to let you know that this is based on the 2000 census data, but unfortunately, between 2000 and the 2010 census, the Census Bureau decided that they no longer would collect data on indoor plumbing or not. So unfortunately, we right now don't have a way of knowing whether we're making progress on that or having a good sense of how many households actually lack indoor plumbing. So with that, I'm going to turn the next part of the presentation over to Bill Hogrewe.
And I should make one other point here too, is that these are data for places that do not have complete water and sanitation services. And it doesn't have any indication in there whether or not you've got a water system that's just on the edge that's getting held together with duct tape and baling wire and so forth. So that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. Doesn't show you how close we are to issues that might cause public health problems. So what I wanted to do now is take a little look at comparing some of the characteristics of drinking water systems from small systems to large systems. Very general discussion of some general characteristics. First thing is operations. So you'll find that small systems have either a part-time operator that does a whole lot of other things, either for the community or outside the community, or they have a contract operator that deals with a whole bunch of different water systems. So they don't have somebody that's at the system full-time, spending their full attention on it. Operators at small systems generally are required to have a lower level of certification, and they have a low level of certification. The treatment and distribution system operation is usually combined, whereas at larger systems, you may have somebody that only takes coliform samples, or that only works on the turbidimeters on the filters. It's very focused. And when we're training operators, we actually find that small system operators have a better grasp of the whole thing because they got to deal with everything. Whereas large system operators, their work life is focused quite possibly just on one thing. In terms of maintenance, a general statement is that small systems deal more with reactive maintenance. So if something breaks, you go out there and you fix it. Whereas large systems have preventive maintenance plans and keep on top of what needs to be done to extend the life of equipment. One other thing that I don't have up here in terms of operations is that small systems sometimes are only operated part of the year or seasonally. And so there's startup and shutdown issues that you have to deal with and the characteristics of those systems. So let's look at the equipment that you normally find in small systems. They often have just disinfection or a bag filter or very simple equipment, whereas large systems, of course, can have a much higher level of complexity with their equipment. In terms of capital cost per connection, it is, the economies of scale are such that a small system will have a much higher cost per connection for the whole equipment in the system, whether it's the distribution system or the treatment. From my experience, it can run anywhere from 10 to 20 times the cost per connection from a small system that serves maybe 100 people, even up to 1,000 people, to a large system that serves a couple 100,000 people. So as a result, your water bills are going to be 10 to 100 times bigger if you're paying the full cost for a small system. In terms of monitoring and sampling, for small systems, that's often done by the operator and it's all manual, whereas with large systems, you can have some automated sampling and monitoring for process controls, or you have somebody that takes the compliance samples, and that's all they do is go out and take the samples and get them to the lab and so forth. Another big difference has to do with management. In a management of a small system, the boards are usually volunteers. They do other things. That's not their primary focus. Whereas with large systems, they can be specific to that utility, and that can be a big part of their work life. Small systems generally have minimal capital improvement plans, whereas large systems can have asset management plans and capital improvement plans that go out and look at the 20 or the 50-year life of their complete system. The rates in small systems are often set by politics. People get elected and saying, I'm not going to raise your water rates. I don't care why. And rates in large systems, though, they're set often by analysis and also politics. There's included in there too. So there's a lot of other factors, but these are kind of the ones that really will influence the technology that will work within a small system. So let's take a look at an example of some characteristics of a small system. Here's one that I worked on a couple of years ago. It's a homeowners association. It's in Uray County, Colorado. And some of the physical characteristics of that is that it's at 8,600 feet, so you're going to have some winter issues up there in terms of access as well as in terms of some equipment problems. They've got that famous ice donut in their storage tank that goes up and down and tears everything up as it goes up and down. They have 93 connections, so something around 200 people, and they are year-round folks. Their source is a spring, and it has been determined to be groundwater under the direct influence of surface water. So it is a gluty system, so they have to filter. And typical of that kind of source water, they see a large variation in the turbidity in the source water, as well as the flow rate, the amount that's coming out of the spring, so the amount of water that they've got available to it. But they do have a well or two that's available to augment that supply. But it does cost them a lot more to use the well water than it does to use the spring water, just because of the pumping characteristics of where the well is. They have got water rights to that spring, and anybody familiar with water rights in Colorado know that they need to use that water right in order to keep it, and they want to be able to do that. So the equipment that they've got a spring box that's got essentially a submersible well pump in it that pulls the water out of the spring box and feeds it into their system. They apply a coagulant. It's a polyaluminum sulfate coagulant that they've been using for quite a while. It goes into a pressure media filter. It's a sand filter. And from that, then it goes into a bag filter, cartridge filter arrangement, and that's pretty much their compliance technology. That's what they've got. That satisfies the treatment technology requirements for their system. Is that they've got that bag filter. They then disinfect with hypochlorite, and they go into actually the two storage tanks. They've got an underground storage tank, and then they pump up to an above ground storage tank. Just taking a look at some of the photographs here. There's the spring pump there with a housing around it. I believe the reason why they got that is for cooling. I don't remember why they've got that on it. It's very shallow. I mean, it's only a few feet down into the spring box. Goes into this pressure sand filter here, which is in this case, it's a modified water softener tank, and we'll get into that in just a second. And then it goes into a strain right cartridge bank over here. And in that case, the fellow's holding up one of the cartridges instead of the bags. This one is capable of using bags or cartridges. So in terms of capacity, and now when capacity, I'm talking here about technical, managerial, and financial capacity. It's only about a half-hour drive on a gravel road to the nearest town. But like I said, it's at 8,600 feet, and so in the winter, that can be an issue if you've got to get someplace for spare parts, or if you've got an operator that's off-site to be able to get up to it. Their median household income is around $44,000 a year, so they're just right at about 80% of the statewide median household income. which some funders use as a designation of that. Below that, they'll use that as a community that qualifies for some assistance in terms of their funding terms. So they're not poor, but they're also not extremely wealthy. So they've got some resources available. Their water rates are fairly substantial, and I was not able to find that when I was pulling these data up. I think they're probably around $100 a month or something like that as their base. They have a contract operator that is not on site, and he is the operator in responsible charge, the ORC. He is the one that's responsible for the system. So any decisions that be made on the system have to be made by this person that's not on site. There is an on-site non-certified operator that is a member of the community that can get to it. I mean, he can walk to it or ski to it if he has to get to the facilities. Okay, so another capacity issue. For example, here is an as-built drawing from that. They do have real drawings, but this is just an example of what an as-built drawing that when I asked them for something, that's what I got. And it is color-coded, though, so I'll give them that. They get extra points for being color-coded. And all the information that I needed was on there. So that's a good thing. So what was the problem? They were having issues. They had a similar system that was installed. It was a pressure sand filter with a bag filter and chlorination afterwards. And it was probably 20 to 30 years old, and it was reaching the end of its useful life. There was lots of corrosion. There was they couldn't get spare parts for it, and so they had somebody design it. Did I do that?
No, it's me. I'm just trying to respond to the folks. I couldn't get to this. Just bear with me just a moment to make sure. Everybody says there's good. All right, we'll get to these questions afterwards. My apologies, folks. Sorry for the distraction.
Okay.
Back to Bill.
So, so they decided they needed to do a bunch of upgrades to the system. And they had some distribution system upgrades, some water tank upgrades, and treatment system upgrades. And so they went out and got an engineer that was in that part of Colorado. Now, this is western Colorado, so it's a much less populated area than along the Front Range where we are. They got the engineer to come in and do a design and to replace the facility they had with a new pressure filter and a new cartridge filter after it. So they installed it, they ran it to test it. They weren't able to get the flow rate through it that they needed because they wanted to be able to pump at their water right flow rate. They weren't able to do that. They also noticed that the pressure filter, which actually is acting as a pre-filter to the bag filter, or the cartridge filter, was not functioning properly, and they were having to replace these cartridges much more frequently than they had in the past, and the cartridges are much more expensive than the bags. So it was the operating costs were through the roof. The operator had to be there a lot more, and every time the operator come up, it cost them. So their operating costs were much higher than what they anticipated them to be. So I got contacted by the USDA folks that had funded this and asked if we could go in there and try to figure out what was going on with it. So what we did was a bit of an I think you unplugged me. Did you?
Yeah, I did not. Let me just click here, then you'll be better. Be able to go now.
So we were asked to go in there and do an investigation. And what we did was try to figure out, okay, is the pump that's in there, is it pumping the way it was supposed to be? And is it a big enough pump for the system that they've got? And the second question was whether or not this pre-filter was operating the way that it should, or was there some things that need to be changed on the design? Now, keep in mind that the system did not have the capability of doing this themselves. And the engineer this was not his primary project that he had worked on. This was a small project for what he was working on. So what we did was went in and did a pump test, very appropriate technology, 55-gallon drum, and a stopwatch, right? To make sure the flow meter was working right. And from then on, we used the flow meter actually the flow meter was in the part of the system that we couldn't use. So we used the drum to do the entire pump curve, and which is our test was the blue curve here, is what the actual pump was pumping. The red is the off of the pump curve for the pump itself. So for some reason, it was not pumping to its curve. Then the second thing we did was a system test, system curve, where we, luckily the pump had a variable speed drive on it, so we were able to put varying flow rates through the system and develop a system curve that said, okay, with the clean filters, here is what we're able to, here's what the pressure drop looks like through the system. Where these two curves cross, that's what you're able to do, right? Their water rate was about 36 gallons a minute, which even if the pump was doing its design, it would just barely meet that. So, there's a couple things that we were able to conclude from that, but the final test that we did was we lowered the flow rate on the pressure filter and tested its performance using turbidity as a measure to see whether the filter would, whether it was the flow rate going through the filter or the filter itself that was a problem. So what we found out was the pump was too small, or the pressure drop in the system was too big, and that the pressure filter was overloaded. I'll give you some numbers in a minute, and for folks that are familiar with filters, we'll probably hear some sighs or some gasps from the audience. So the solution was to replace the pump, get a larger pressure filter, and what happened was the engineer redid all the work, redesigned it for free. Thank you very much. And the manufacturer also took back the filter and replaced it, for the extra price. So it didn't cost them very much to redo the whole thing. But what caused this? Okay, and this is the kind of the gist of why this is a characteristic of small system. What caused it was the manufacturer drove what the engineer did. The manufacturer said, okay, here's this filter that we've got. Yes, you can load it at 20 gallons per minute per square foot, and it should be fine, right? Okay. There wasn't any pilot testing done on the system to determine what the pressure drop through the system would be at the flow rate that they were wanting. There was no ability in-house to do any kind of review of the design. And finally, the state reviewed it and said it was okay because the technology that was satisfying the treatment technology requirement was the bag filter. The pre-filter was not part of the compliance. It just ended up costing them more to do it. It worked. They got water that met their specs, but it cost them a whole lot to do it. So, did I not put that in there? I know I put it in there. Oh yeah, So they were loading it at 21 gallons per minute per square foot instead of 5. And 5 is the normal number that you would load a filter like that at. So anyway, okay, so that's an example of, hope I'm not making folks dizzy on the online there.
It's all right.
Is it all right?
Yep.
Nobody's dizzy, okay.
I don't see anybody falling over. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is just an example of a small system and what we might be concerned with when we are looking at technologies for a small system. So now we got a chat function on there, and we've got folks in the room here, and we were going to have, I think it would work best if we just kind of, anybody that's got a comment, jump in there. But what type and size of system are we targeting with the technologies that we're using in the centers? So what type and size are the targets of what we're doing? Anybody in here got a comment on that?
So for our technology,
Yeah.
I'm looking at a small utility.
Yeah.
So you've designed biological filters that are already in small utilities and making them biological.
Okay.
So small scale.
So surface water, folks that already have conventional, I'll call it conventional sand filtration.
Correct.
Okay, all right? And which is going to be systems that are over, what, 1,000, 2,000 people, something like that?
There's no number that would set it if it's a certain.
Well, I mean, but okay, so from your experience, what's the smallest, conventional sand filter that you've seen?
I'd say probably over 5,000.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. How about, are we getting any chat in that thing? Anybody raising their hand or doing anything?
No chat from there, but that's part of the thing we're going to have to address this next go around. Why don't we have people just kind of chime in that way with the. Everybody is unmuted now. Anybody got any small systems perspectives on how small a systems y'all want to be working on? All right. Why don't we keep moving? We'll go to the discussion part. We'll
About that.
You're gonna hit the mute again then?
Yep. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so we're trying out this system as an interactive platform as well. And so it's normally now, if we were doing a training, we'd have everybody break into groups and we'd come back and we'd talk about this stuff. But since we've got the, we need a little mirror so people can see what R2 looks like.
Yeah.
So if you don't know what R2 looks like, imagine an eyeball on the end of a stalk. And
That's watching Bill.
Yeah, so it's watching me. All right, so let's move on to the next part of our session. I think you may need to punch something over.
Go ahead.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the compliance issues that small systems face. So we went in as a part of this, looking at the CIDWIS data, we went in and looked at what types of violations do we normally see with small systems. And this graph here shows that TCR, total call form rule, public notice rule, and VOCs and SOCs, then lead and copper rule, and then things start to tail off after that. The VOCs and the SOCs, we can probably ignore those because every one of the VOCs and every one of the SOCs, when they got a violation, they ended up with multiple violations for the same system for the same problem. So we're going to ignore those for now. And total call form rule, though, is a big one there for the number of violations that we get from any system of any type. If we're looking at monitoring and reporting violations, so those are cases where somebody didn't take a sample or they didn't report the sample. Total call form rule, again, is a biggie. VOCs and SOCs, again, we'll ignore those, and everything else kind of tails off quite a bit after that. So total call form rule is another big issue. If we looked at health-based violations with all systems, again, total call form rule is a biggie on the number of violations, and then disinfection byproduct rule is the next one in line. Then we got arsenics and nitrates after that. So
is this 2013 again?
2013, yes, just CIDWIS data. Now, if we take a look at the health-based violations for systems serving less than just 10,000, so that was all systems was the last one. We've still got total call form rule. We've got disinfection byproducts rule, and then arsenic, and then RADS moves up, nitrates moves way down. So we've got disinfection byproducts, total call form rule are up at the top. So let's look at these in a table, and let's make sure that I'm clear on exactly what I'm saying here. So this is that 95% of the total call form violations are from systems using groundwater. So that's what this table means. Total call form rule violations predominantly come from groundwater systems. Disinfection byproduct rule violations predominantly come from surface water systems, but we've still got issues with groundwater systems. Yeah, so that's one that kind of, oh, that's interesting. Arsenic, of course, comes from groundwater, RADS in groundwater, and surface water treatment rule, of course, comes from surface water.
Although it's important to note that you can be a groundwater system that violates the surface water treatment rule simply because EPA defines systems by their predominant water supply. So if you have multiple water supplies that lots of small systems have, they'll have a spring source they use 5 months out of the year, and they'll have groundwater they use 7 months out of the year. They would be called a groundwater system, but they still have a surface water supply. Important nuance to note.
Right, very good. And so if they violate any of the surface water treatment rules, things like treatment technology or turbidity or disinfection, then they would end up with a violation. So now if we take and normalize that to the number of systems, because remember there's a bunch more groundwater systems that are, there's a bunch more systems that are groundwater systems. So what this says that 4% of all the groundwater systems have total coliform rule violations. Okay. All right, so now we know there's 4% of these systems that need some assistance with total coliform rule compliance. Some of the surface water systems, a much smaller percentage, half of them have got total coliform rule violations. Disinfection byproducts, 3% of all the surface water systems that are less than 10,000 people have got disinfection byproduct problems. And then the rest of the stuff is fairly small. Surface water treatment rule, 2% of the surface water systems have got issues with surface water treatment rule. And again, that can be disinfection, that can be treatment technology, or it could be monitoring problems. So if we look at, let's focus in on these total coliform rule violations. So the key thing in this table says that up to the 3,300 system serving 3,300 people, we've got problems with monitoring and reporting violations for total coliform, but after 3,300, size doesn't really matter. So small systems have problems with monitoring and reporting their total coliform rule, which doesn't have anything to do with the stuff that we're researching, right? Except that it is a, technical, managerial, and financial capacity issue with those systems that they're not able to do that. If we look at the actual MCL violations, so these are actual violations of the rule, we see that it doesn't really matter what size you are until you get up to a very large system, whether or not you're going to have MCL violations. So we've got similar issues with all size systems that we're working with, and even the ones that are a little bit larger than the ones that we're working with. So let's take one quick look now at that was SIDWA's data. Now let's look at sanitary survey data. Sanitary surveys are more of an inspection and a functional look at how a system is operating. And so if we look at the violation, not the violations, but the deficiencies that show up in sanitary surveys for systems serving fewer than 10,000 people, you can see that source is an issue, and I'll discuss what these all mean. Source is an issue, management is an issue, and treatment is an issue, and then there's some other things that kind of tail off toward the end. The definitions of those, and I put it in the same order as they are of importance. So source are things like improper sanitary seal, different well problems with the maintenance of the well, and all of this is well issues. Remember, groundwater is the predominant source for small systems, and so that's where these are coming from well issues. In terms of management, it's a bunch of different kinds of plans that they don't have in place. That's a managerial problem, not necessarily a technical problem. So on the treatment side, the main problems that you see is folks not using NSF-approved additives, improper storage of chemicals, not having 4-log removal, or not meeting CT. Okay, there's the big thing that we're probably focusing on there is not being able to do that, or maintaining a minimum disinfectant residual in the system. So from our standpoint, perhaps that one bullet is or these few bullets right here are the ones that we need to concentrate on. Okay. What happened to the discussion thing? Okay. Sorry. So let's see how this one works. So all those technologies that you're working on, and I know we don't have all of our technology researchers in here right now, but what are the compliance issues that you're trying to address with the technologies that we're looking at? And Chad, can you give us because I know the DeRISK Center has in our purpose which one of the compliance issues we're addressing. So
absolutely. So for DeRISK, the primary focus of compliance issues that we are addressing for small systems is compliance with microbial and disinfection byproducts related issues, first and foremost, and a little bit with nitrate. And for folks that are elsewhere, if you don't mind, you can just chat to all We did get chat up, and so John Meyer is connected here with chat, and we can read off things that you want to chat in about other compliance objectives that you are specifically researching. I know that the focus in the Wind Center, they've got some unique views of multi-contaminant removal with ion exchange, like Trevor Boyer's group at Florida, so looking at both cations and anions. There's some focus on using different disinfection means, using ferrate at winds. So those things are all great objectives that fit in with the small systems view. I think there's some look at fluoride and arsenic as well in a couple of these places. But always look forward to hearing other feedback. So maybe our group chat isn't working, but if you want to chat in your responses, feel free, and we'll unmute those folks and let you talk from there on out. All right, let's keep doing this until we see more come in. Maybe I'm missing some. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Joy. So yeah, send your comments in. We can jump back to that if we get some.
Okay, I'm going to talk real quickly in the interest of time about capacity issues. Now, back in the previous century, when Bill and I were in graduate school in this very complex, capacity kind of meant how much water a plant could treat per unit time, usually a day. In those days, by the way, our offices were down the hall, and what was Bill's office is now a women's room down this wing here. So a lot has changed since then, including how we use capacity. And the word capacity, as an outcome of the 1996 amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act, EPA put an emphasis on 3 areas that are required for the success of safe drinking water provision by a utility. And those are managerial and financial, in addition to technical. So what this meant is that the success in protecting public health through safe drinking water required not just engineering solutions, but financial viability and managerial competency as defined by a variety of areas. So very, very exciting. At RCAP, we've developed some capacity assessment tools that I'll talk about just real quickly. EPA's emphasis coming out of that time, and I actually worked with them on capacity issues in the late 90s, EPA's emphasis was making tools available, and they made, if any of you have ever seen step guides, they have some fabulous tools. And beyond that, but the step guides came out of this late 90s and early 2000 era. Lots of emphasis on training and technical assistance, not only in the technical arena, but also in management and financing of systems, and then improving facilities. Okay, so I mentioned that we have developed an assessment tool. Real quickly, we have an assessment tool that looks like this, and the thing I want to point out about this assessment tool is that we have a variety of ways to use this tool. So as we start to provide assistance to a small system, we can use this for the initial assessment. Where are the weaknesses here? Where do we need to provide interventions, training and technical assistance? But we can use it for a mid-project benchmark to take a look after we've been providing training and assistance for a while at how are we doing? Are we making progress? Are we addressing the correct issues here? Or do we need to go back and maybe revise our strategy for helping this system to achieve and maintain compliance? And then finally, for project closeout, as we evaluate how successful we were in this. Couple more quick things I wanted to show you. The colors are based on a variety of things. We have several categories, including in progress or deficient or acceptable, and then this area over here of critical concern. And where there are blanks is where you fill in the information about that particular system. We're looking here at the technical tab of this tool, but we have similar managerial and financial tabs. We can make this tool available to anybody who wants it. I've sent it out to Scott and Chad in the past, and maybe some of you also were recipients, but let us know if you want to get this. And then just a couple quick looks at typical questions. Do you have an emergency or supplemental water supply? Do you have a source water protection plan, wellhead protection plan? And you see these are various categories here. What percentage of your total water production is lost to leaks? That's a biggie out there that we also help deal with. And please note that not having a certified operator on duty or on call at all times is a critical concern here. So, quick look at another slide that has way too many words on it, but just to tell you about one of the ways that small systems, or that all systems, have gotten assistance, and particularly small systems, is through state revolving loan funds. These are allocations that come to states from the US EPA. And
there you go.
Okay. Sorry, I wanted to finish showing something here and I accidentally clicked it. So here is the assistance agreements of how SRF funds are spent, but here is the allocation amongst system sizes. So you see there's more or less equal allocations regardless of system size. So unfortunately, small systems are getting, there's not as much money to go around for all the small systems in need for reasons that we talked about earlier, just in terms of the sheer number of them. This is June 2012 SRF data. And coming workforce issue is a huge issue in dealing especially with small systems. It's a problem in all size systems. A 10-year-ago study showed that a large percentage of utility workers within 10 years of retirement. Some changes in stock markets may have saved us because maybe if people had retirement plans, they decided to work a few more years. Recent statistics from Illinois, and this was done by Steve Wilson, who is a member of the WINS Center team, showed that 58% of operators were between the ages of 50 and 64, and that was an increase of more than 10% just in 5 years' time. And so these workforce issues are really a train coming at us in terms of sustainable protection of the public through safe drinking water, because we can't, these are not going to be jobs that are outsourced. We've got to have people in plants. We need to recruit. With small systems, one of the issues, in addition to what Bill talked about, where the technology might determine the level of certification with small systems, if they get another level of certification, they might have a better opportunity in a larger community nearby. And so that town might, again, lose its operator. So capacity issues, limited resources for pilot plants, for pilot testing. And so the systems really can't afford to make a mistake. Grant funds are available for capital costs, but grant funds rarely look at the O&M costs, which can be huge and certainly need to be a major consideration in what kind of technology is appropriate for small systems. I mentioned operator certification a couple of times. We've talked about it a couple times here. Technologies may determine what level of certification is required. I know that it used to be that in some states, a membrane plant required a higher level of certification, but increasingly small systems are actually using membranes, but then they don't have the operators at a level of certification to do that. And then limited expertise to evaluate the technologies, as we've discussed a couple of times. So with that, we have another discussion question here, and what would be the biggest challenges for implementing center innovations in small systems? And I'll throw this out to all three of the centers taking part in this webinar. And then I also want to point out that our contact information is in this presentation, and this presentation will be on the various websites. So I'm going to go back to this question as one of our questions to have a few minutes of discussion. And thanks to everybody remotely and in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Joy and Bill, for that. We've got some time here for those that can stay past the hour. I'll come back to me over here. And we're happy to have you all join in more dialogue. I've changed the ability for folks to unmute your line. So if you want to jump in and have some dialogue, we can put you on screen if you got your video up, and we can make this a bit more personal. I did see that I got some input from, we got the heads up from the folks at UBC. Sean wrote in and saying that UBC is looking at NOM removal with different alternative technologies that can be perhaps more appropriate for small and remote communities, specifically electrocoagulation as a chemical coagulation alternative. And I know that I'll put on screen another great thing that the folks at WINS are working on. Here is the potential impacts of systems that they're working on in terms of the key issues here on the left, the numbers of systems that they have assessed that are impacted by those things and what those populations mean in terms of their system serving fewer than 10,000 people. And like every good EPA-funded research project, there is a bingo diagram of or it's either bingo or battleship key code of which projects are assessing those things. So I guess we have a little bit of time. Happy to have folks jump in with asking questions. I would also solicit people's feedback on the approach for the delivery of this, knowing that in future iterations, we want this to be even more so collaborative with multiple students giving shorter presentations and allowing a bit more dialogue. The reality that we have, we had up to 25 connections at one time, and based on who I see in the rooms, looks like I bet we have 50 people participating. So I would count this as a success, but we want to hear from you and get feedback from you all. So if you are interested in chiming in on the conversation, please unmute yourself and say hello and fire away.
Couldn't you get the light, please?
Oh, yeah, we can turn the light on back here.
Thank you. Well, unless we may have questions coming up on screen. I don't know.
Chad, this is John Devison at UMass.
John, thanks for joining us. Let me, I'll put you on screen for the folks that are here in the room.
We are on screen. I don't think so.
Yeah,
We're on screen there. You're on the big screen.
Yep.
Yeah. I would say it's really great to get the series kicked off. I think it's a success to do this for sure. And I think Bill enjoyed presenting a lot of useful background information and tough questions to answer with respect to the applicability of the things we're investigating. The crux of being small system centers is that challenge to translate our science into implementable applications at the small scale. At WINS here, we're trying to do some piloting work, and one of our projects is trying to get around regulatory barriers between states. So that's one that we see as a big challenge. And Joy already mentioned operator capability is a key thing. So I want to mention too that independent of the EPA centers, we have a project here in Massachusetts where we're working with the state DEP and doing some training and outreach to small systems as well. But I think there'll be some good dovetailing of lessons learned.
Yeah, terrific. Those are all great things. And I'll be honest, one of the things I find most exciting about all this is that stakeholders in these issues, whether it be states, technology providers, and first and foremost, small systems, are reaching out and connecting with folks within the DeRISK and WINS centers to start in the US what folks have already been doing in Canada with WaterNet there. And so the actual efforts to move this ahead by solving legitimate problems through those collaborative efforts is already underway. And I think we're going to have lots of real world metrics to show the impacts of the work that's being put in by students and researchers. So good points. Other thoughts, feedback? Let's see. Nice compliments from other researchers saying great presentations on the chat.
Great to hear. Thanks.
So, terrific. Any other thoughts or questions from folks?
Where do we heading next, Chad? We had a schedule for Steve. I heard we had some dates.
We don't have the finalized schedule for Steve Wilson, who's a part of the WIN Center, to talk more about some of the statewide challenges associated with implementation barriers, as John Tobias just described. We will nail down that schedule and get it on the calendar for everybody. Being that it looks like this platform facilitated this fairly well, we'll probably keep on this same approach. A couple little things we'll try to improve upon, but we are eager to get that scheduled and have hopefully 2 more between now and Christmas break for the academic calendars in mind, with then the plan in starting with the academic calendar after Christmas break for folks to start having student-based research plans. So, it's a great question. A.E. Riley poses the question, will this webinar be available online? If so, where? Yes, we are recording this. Yes, we have the intent to post these on the drinkingwatercenters.org joint website as kind of the seminar series. That is the website that kind of all 3 centers are intending to collaborate and submit content to. So, knowing that this is the first go of this, we'll see how quickly that can be done. I would like to have that up before the next seminar is scheduled and hosted. So,
another comment is that some of you have heard us talking about teaching a course for credit on small systems. That is actively being pursued. We plan to have an abstract out on that course, at least in terms of the general content, in the next week. And we'll be talking with some other faculty members at other institutions about picking up some modules in the class. It'll be a distance learning setup, and more details will be forthcoming quickly, I hope next week.
great. I guess the only other thing I would add is that we are a little over a week away from the Water Quality Technology Conference. It'll be held in Salt Lake City, and I know that a lot of the researchers are likely to be there. Several from the University of Colorado will be there. And so I would encourage those of you that are going to attend. One of the first presentations, I'll give a quick highlight to John Meyer from the university. Will be presenting his research from Project 1 of DeRISK on Monday morning at 10:15 a.m. One of the things I'd like to get done between now and then is get a quick heads up to everybody within all the centers about all the presentations related to this. And put simply, let's find each other, connect, sit down, have lunch with each other, and start growing those relationships as we further on what we're doing here for small systems. So that's all we have here. It's happy hour at UMass, it looks like. And for those of you on the East Coast, we've got a couple more hours to go here in Colorado, but appreciate everybody joining on, and have a great weekend. We'll see you again soon.